Hello. Today's topic is going to be cells. We know that one of our characteristics of life is that all living things are made of cells. So an organism has a fairly good organization to it. The smallest part being cells. So we look at, if we go broader, an organism has many systems that work together, especially humans. You've probably in life science talked about the different systems of the body. So all of those systems work together to help the organism live. Organs systems are made of organs, which is a specialized center of body function composed of several different types of tissues. So for example, an organ, your eye is an organ, your stomach is an organ made of muscle cells and blood vessels, which all different connective tissues. So they all work together. Organs, therefore, are made up of tissue. So they are groups of cells with a common structure and function. And then tissue are made up of cells. So as you get smaller and smaller, you have organ systems, organs, and cells. So the cell is the fundamental structure and unit of life, which every organism that we know of is made of cells. You can see here in the picture, it looks at a muscle cell. Muscle cells work together to be muscle tissue, and that works together to be the organ, such as the stomach. And the stomach is part of that digestive system with other organs. When you look at those cells, there's two main types. We have prokaryotes and eukaryotes. To remember this, a prokaryote is earlier, and you are a eukaryote. So both types of cells have a cell membrane and contain DNA. Those are the two similarities. Prokaryotes are cells that do not contain a nucleus. They're very small and simple. They have usually one large circular bracelet of DNA, a chromosome that is loose in the cell. It's not contained, it just floats around. And our main example of prokaryotes are bacteria. They're thought to be among the first type of organism, if you look in an evolutionary term, because they're more simple. So here are examples of different prokaryotes. We have a picture that is a general diagram with different parts that prokaryotes might have. They don't all have each individual part, but you can see in the middle that purple pinkish structure, that's their DNA, and it's all coiled up, but it's one section that's in there. You have a cell wall in some, you have the plasma membrane, which we call the cell membrane, you have the cytoplasm. Some organisms that are prokaryotes have the flagellum that allow them to move. Some have the cilia, which are the small, or the pilus. But that's a basic structure. So we have three examples. Sorry, my picture is covering one of them. But you have the green is E. coli. The purplish blue on the bottom is a resistant streptococcus type. And then the streptococcus that's red, that my video is over, is the kind streptococcus that causes strep throat. Then you look at eukaryotes. Eukaryotes are cells that contain a nucleus. So a nucleus is a large structure that contains the cell's genetic material in the form of DNA. So you can see here, it's a big ball in this image, kind of orange, brownish color. That's the nucleus. That would include our chromosomes. To keep it safe, it's like a little vault. These are large and complex cells. They can become highly specialized depending on their function and how specialized the organism is as well. So our cell shapes relate to the function of that cell. A nervous cell in your brain or your nervous system, they have these structures that look like cables because they carry basically electrical impulses. Your skin cells are flat like a pancake because there's different layers that fit on top of each other to provide that waterproof barrier of your skin. A muscle cell is long and it's shaped like a rubber band because it expands and contracts to do its job. So our eukaryotes can be unicellular when you look at the organism. So it can be an organism that only has one cell. Or it can be an organism that is multicellular, like us, in most of the images on the slide. Eukaryotes include plants, animals, fungi, and protists. So protists are things like amoeba and paramecium. You've probably heard at one point in your life. Fungi are your mushrooms and your molds, and we're pretty good on animals and plants. So our eukaryotic cells, because they're more specialized, they have more structures within them. They contain these things called organelles. So organelles are specialized structures that perform specific functions. Sort of like you have a big company and multiple people have different jobs. The cytoplasm is kind of the space, the portion outside of the cell nucleus. We think of it like a jelly liquid substance, and it kind of fills the cell. A lot of the chemical reactions that happen in your body happen in the cytoplasm. The nucleus is the other major section, the control center of the cell, where you have all of the directions, the DNA is held within it. Other organelles include chromatin and chromosome, nucleolus, ribosomes, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatus, lysosomes, vacuoles, mitochondria, chloroplasts, cytoskeleton, and centrioles. So you can see the picture. What we'll do is when we get to a topic that involves some of these organelles, we'll talk about it then. Like your chloroplasts have to do with photosynthesis. Your mitochondria has to do with making energy, taking the glucose and breaking it down. So each one has a different job, and we'll talk about it when we get to different subjects within the year. So we have the cell boundary. Right, we have a cell membrane. It's a thin, flexible barrier that regulates what leaves and enters the cell. So it's kind of like the fence, except it's 3D. Okay, remember your cells are a sphere. So anything that has to get into the cell has to go through this lipid bilayer. You can see in the image, it's made up of these little phospholipids, and it's in this bilayer. So the balls, the yellow balls, are they like water, and the little tails that are in them do not like water. And that's how this structure stays together. It's hydrophobic and hydrophilic. They also have the purple proteins and the carbohydrates. You're in my video, Coop, just to let you know. Cell walls, they provide support and protection for a cell. Specifically, we see them in plants, algae, fungi, and many prokaryotes. So we should know that plants don't have any skeleton inside them, no bones. So in order for them to become tall like a tree, they need a hard structure. So that is the cell wall. Cell walls are outside the cell membrane, and they're composed mostly of a carbohydrate called cellulose, and that's what gives it its hard structure. So when you're talking about these layers, you need to have movement through them to get the materials that the cells need to be living. So movement depends on concentration. So you can think of when you make popcorn in a microwave, the smell of the popcorn stays by the microwave and it's very strong, and then it slowly goes out through the room. So that has to do with the concentration, how much of that smell is around. So things move from higher concentration, like the popcorn smell by the microwave, to lower concentration, and it spreads out. That's called diffusion. So it's the movement of molecules from an area of higher concentration to an area of lower concentration. What it wants to do is it wants to reach equilibrium, all of our materials. You can see this when you take water and you put like food dye in. It's really concentrated, but then over time, if you just let it sit, the whole bit of water will look the same. It'll have all the color spread throughout. A special type of diffusion is called osmosis, and this is when the water will move across a selectively permeable membrane. Water can move across the membrane and many solutes can't. So this is very important when you're talking about cells in solution. So you've probably, if you've taken a long shower or bath or gone swimming for a long time, you've noticed that your hands start to look weird. They start looking pruny. Part of that is the effects of osmosis. So we're going to look at each type of movement. So we have different terms for the concentrations on two sides, so within the cell and outside of the cell. So when you're talking about cells in our body, we are mostly in an isotonic solution. So anything that's around us has the same concentrations normally. So this means that water is constantly moving in and out of our cells at the same rate. So they stay kind of the same, part of our homeostasis. If you take a cell and you put it in what's called a hypertonic solution, like really salty or really sugary, something's going to happen. Your cell is going to react to that stimuli. And what normally happens in our cells is water inside will move out to dilute that concentration. So it moves from the higher concentration of water to lower concentration. So what that does is, because something is leaving the cell, it's going to make it smaller. The cell is going to shrink, which isn't good. This can happen when you're, dehydrated. When you're dehydrated, your head starts hurting. You start getting headaches. That's because your cells are losing, you need more water. You have hypotonic, concentration of the solute is lower outside. So that means you're put in like distilled water, which isn't good. You don't want to drink distilled water because this will happen inside your digestive system. The dilute water, the distilled water, will go into your cells and they can actually burst. So you don't want to drink distilled water. So when we look at our last bit, osmosis in plants. So if you don't water a plant, usually what happens is they start getting shrivelly and they don't stand up tall. That's because of water pressure. When you give them water, they can blow up what's called their vacuole, you can see in the picture, and they want a lot of water in them to hold their cell walls up straight. We have another type of diffusion called facilitated diffusion. So it still uses the concentration gradient. It goes from high to low, but some things can't get through the cell membrane. They have to go through this protein gate. So you can see these green molecules are going through to get inside the cell. If you want to go against the concentration, you have something called active transport, where you have to put in energy. If you're active, you're using energy. So this is either endocytosis, which is entering the cell, or exocytosis, which is exiting the cell. And this, you just need to provide energy in the form of what we call ATP, which we'll talk about later on. And that, I believe, is all for this video.